Let me ask you something, and I want you to sit with it for a second. When's the last time you said yes to something, and the whole time you were doing it, a little voice in the back of your head was saying, "I don't want to be here"? Maybe it was covering for a coworker who never returns the favor. Maybe it was biting your tongue when somebody disrespected you because you didn't want to cause a scene. Maybe it was doing something for someone you care about and resenting every single minute of it, but smiling through it anyway. If any of that landed, you already know what we're talking about today. The nice guy trap. And I want to be clear right out of the gate, this isn't about becoming a hard man. It's not about being cold or selfish or turning your back on people. A man who can't be kind isn't strong. He's just broken in a different direction. What we're talking about is the guy who is so focused on keeping everybody else comfortable that he's quietly suffocating himself. The guy who mistakes being agreeable for being good. The guy who gives and gives and gives, and then wonders why he feels invisible, exhausted, and a little bit angry at the world. That anger, that's not weakness. That's a signal. Your soul knocking on the door, telling you something's off in the foundation. If we're going to dig into that foundation over this series, we're going to look at where this pattern comes from, what it costs you, and, most importantly, how you build something better in its place. No blame, no bitterness, just honest work. If you're looking for solid ground, not just easy answers, subscribe and stay with us. This channel is built for men who are serious about the work. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to be a pushover. This thing gets built, slowly, brick by brick, usually starting when you were young enough that you didn't even know it was happening. Think about it. When you were a kid, how did the adults around you respond to you? Were you praised for being quiet, for not making trouble, for being such a good boy? Did you learn, maybe not from words but from the way the room felt, that your needs were secondary? That love was something you had to earn by being useful or agreeable? A lot of us grew up in homes where keeping the peace was survival. Maybe there was anger you had to tiptoe around. Maybe there was emotional distance that you tried to close by being helpful enough, good enough, invisible enough. You learned that having needs caused problems, so you buried them. Carl Jung would call what got buried your shadow. All those legitimate desires, man, for respect, for space, for honesty, didn't disappear. They just went underground, and they've been quietly running the show ever since. Here's the thing about that little boy who learned to shrink himself. He was smart. He was doing what he had to do to navigate his world. That strategy kept him safe. The problem is, you're not a kid anymore, but the software is still running. That same pattern that protected you at 8 years old is now sabotaging you at 35 or 45 or 55. It's making you say yes when you mean no. It's making you swallow your voice. It's making you hand people the controls to your own life. Understanding where it started isn't about blame. It's about seeing the blueprint clearly so you can finally redraw it. Here's a truth that's hard to hear the first time. A lot of what we call being nice, a lot of it, is actually fear wearing a friendly mask. Not always, but more often than most men are willing to admit. When you go out of your way to make sure everyone around you is happy, when you can't stand the idea of someone being upset with you, when you twist yourself into a pretzel to avoid conflict, that's not generosity. That's anxiety. That's a craving for approval that runs so deep, it feels like oxygen. Psychologists have a term for it: external validation. You're outsourcing your sense of worth. Instead of knowing your own value from the inside, you need constant confirmation from the outside. A nod, a thank you, someone not being angry at you, just proof that you're okay. And here's why it becomes a trap. Approval is one of the most unreliable currencies on earth. People are moody, they're distracted, they have their own problems. Some days you can do everything right and still get nothing back. But if your self-worth is tied to their reaction, you're on a roller coaster you didn't buy a ticket for. The nice guy keeps being nice, partly because deep down he's terrified of what happens if he stops. What if they don't like me anymore? What if they get angry? What if I'm alone? That fear is running a lot of the kindness, and on some level, he knows it. That's why the resentment builds, because he's not freely giving, he's paying a toll to feel safe. Real kindness doesn't need a receipt. It doesn't come from fear, it comes from a man who is solid enough on the inside that he can give without needing anything back. That's what we're building toward. Let's talk about the bill. Because this pattern, the constant people-pleasing, the yes when you mean no, the swallowed words and buried frustrations, it isn't free. It costs you. And the ledger is longer than most men realize until they're standing in the middle of a life that doesn't feel like their own. First, it costs you your identity. When you spend years being whatever the room needs you to be, you lose track of who you actually are. What do you want? What do you believe? What would you do if you weren't managing everyone else's feelings? A lot of guys genuinely don't know. The mirror shows them a face, but the inside is hollow. Second, it costs you your relationships. Here's the cruel irony. Nice guys often think their niceness is what makes people love them. But real intimacy requires a real person. You can't truly connect with someone who has no edges, no opinions, no capacity to push back. People sense the performance, and over time they stop trusting it. They might stay, but they lose respect. And a relationship without respect is just comfortable furniture. Third, it costs you your health. Suppressed anger doesn't evaporate. It goes into your body, into your gut, into your jaw and your shoulders and your sleep. Chronic stress, fatigue, that low-grade irritability you can never quite explain. You're carrying weight you were never supposed to carry alone. And finally, it costs you your self-respect. Every time you betray what you actually think, feel, or need in order to keep someone else comfortable, you send yourself a message. Your truth doesn't matter. You chip away at something that is very hard to rebuild once it's gone. The good news is, it can be rebuilt. That's exactly what the rest of this series is about. All right, we've looked at the wound. Now let's start talking about what healthy actually looks like. Because I think one of the biggest mistakes men make when they start waking up to this pattern is they swing too hard in the other direction. They decide that being nice was the problem, so they stop being nice. They get hard, they get cold. They start treating generosity like it's something to be ashamed of. That's not healing. That's just a different kind of broken. The goal isn't to stop being a kind man. The goal is to become a man whose kindness has roots. Think of it like a tree. A tree with shallow roots looks fine on a calm day, but when the wind picks up, when someone pushes back, when things get hard, when someone doesn't appreciate what you've given, it bends all the way over. It can't hold its own. A tree with deep roots, it still sways. It's not rigid, but it doesn't fall. It has a center that holds. Kindness built on deep roots looks different from kindness built on fear. When you help someone from a rooted place, it's a genuine gift. You're not doing it to manage their feelings. You're not doing it to secure their approval. You're doing it because it aligns with who you actually are. And here's the key. A rooted man can also say no. He can disagree. He can disappoint someone without falling apart because his sense of self doesn't depend on their reaction. That's the target. Not less kindness, better kindness. Kindness that you chose from a position of strength rather than kindness you owe from a position of fear. The difference might look the same from the outside, but you'll feel it on the inside. And so will the people around you. For a man who spent years saying yes, no feels like a grenade. Like if you just say it, everything's going to explode. The relationship ends, the person hates you, you become the bad guy. So you never say it. Or you say it so apologetically, so wrapped in qualifications, that it barely counts. Let me tell you something. No is a complete sentence, and learning to use it, calmly, clearly, without a 10-paragraph explanation, is one of the most important skills you will ever develop. Now, I'm not talking about being blunt to the point of being cruel. You don't have to drop a no like a hammer every time. You can be warm, you can be respectful, but the thing you're communicating has to be real. Here's what most men discover when they start practicing this. The explosion they were afraid of almost never comes, or if it does, it's manageable. People are more resilient than we give them credit for, and the ones who genuinely lose their minds because you said no once. That tells you something important about the relationship you need to hear. Start small. Somebody asks you for a favor you don't have the capacity for. Instead of twisting yourself to make it work, try this. I can't do that right now. Not, I'm so sorry, I feel terrible. Maybe next week, let me see if I can. Just, I can't do that right now. And then, here's the hard part. Stop talking. Silence after a no feels uncomfortable. Resist the urge to fill it with apologies. Practice with low-stakes situations. Build the muscle. Because saying no appropriately isn't selfishness, it's honesty. And a man who is honest about his limits is a man people can actually trust. Boundaries has become one of those words that gets thrown around so much it's almost lost its meaning. But the concept underneath it is real, and it matters. A boundary isn't a wall. A wall is designed to keep everyone out. A man who builds walls isn't protecting himself. He's isolating himself. That's not strength. That's fear with a different address. A boundary is more like a property line. It defines where you end and someone else begins. It's not about keeping people away. It's about being clear about what you're willing to engage with and what you're not. The mistake a lot of men make is they think boundaries are something you announce. Like you write up a list of rules and hand it to people. That's not how it works in the real world. Boundaries are communicated through behavior, through what you allow consistently, through how you respond when something crosses a line, through the choices you make day after day. If you say, "I don't accept that kind of talk" once and then let it slide the next time, you don't have a boundary. You have a preference. And people will treat it like a suggestion. Consistency is what makes a boundary real. Not anger, not lectures, just steady, repeated behavior that shows people where the line is. Here's the hard part. Setting real limits is going to make some people uncomfortable, especially people who are benefiting from you having none. And that discomfort, some of them are going to express it as guilt or anger or manipulation. They'll say you've changed, you're not as nice as you used to be. Here's your answer, you're right, I've changed, I'm clearer now. That's not a problem to solve, that's the work paying off. Here's a question I want you to sit with. Outside of your job, outside of your role as a father or a partner or a friend, who are you? What do you believe? What do you stand for? What would you refuse to do, no matter who was asking? A lot of men who fall into the nice guy pattern genuinely struggle to answer those questions. Not because they're shallow men, usually it's the opposite. They're deep feelers who put so much energy into reading and responding to others that they never did the interior work of figuring out their own values, their own voice, their own code. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming a distinct, defined self, not a reaction to other people, not a role you play, an actual person. This is the foundational work, because you can't maintain limits or speak honestly, or give from strength if you don't know who you are beneath all the accommodating. So here's practical territory. Start asking yourself some old-fashioned questions, the kind men used to sit with around a fire. What do I value more than my own comfort? What kind of man do I want to be remembered as? Where have I been dishonest, not to deceive others, but to avoid their disappointment? Write it down if you need to. The act of putting words to it makes it real. The man who knows who he is, who has a genuine identity, doesn't need to people please. He's already got his footing. And from that footing, he can be generous, kind, and present without losing himself in the process. I want to paint you a picture of what's on the other side of this work, because change is hard, and it helps to know what you're walking toward. The man on the other side of this isn't harder. He's not colder. He hasn't traded in his heart for a tough guy act. If anything, he's more open than he used to be, because he's no longer burning energy on resentment or performance or quietly keeping score. He's honest, not brutal, honest. When something bothers him, he says so, calmly, clearly, and then it's done. It doesn't collect in the basement of his chest for months until something small triggers an explosion of all the unsaid things. He helps people, genuinely, freely, because he wants to, not because he's afraid of what happens if he doesn't. And when he can't help, he says so without a spiral of guilt. People trust him, not because he's agreeable, but because he's real. There's no guesswork with him. What you see is what you get. And that consistency, that groundedness, is something that draws people in rather than pushing them away. He has a relationship with himself. He knows what he needs to recharge. He takes his own well-being seriously, not out of selfishness, but because he understands a dried-up well can't give anyone water. His relationships are better, not easier, better, because they're built on honesty, on mutual respect, on two actual people choosing each other, rather than one person endlessly managing another. This man exists on the other side of the work we've been talking about. He's not a fantasy. He's just the version of you that hasn't been built yet. And here's what I know about builders. They build. One day, one decision, one honest word at a time. All right, we've covered a lot of ground. We talked about where this pattern gets built, usually in childhood, quietly, when you were just trying to keep the peace. We talked about what it costs, your identity, your relationships, your self-respect. We talked about the difference between kindness and fear, between limits and walls, between people-pleasing and genuine generosity. And now we're here, at the end of the conversation and the beginning of the work. I want to leave you with something simple, because the most important truths usually are. You don't have to overhaul your life by Tuesday. You don't have to become a different man overnight. Real change doesn't work like that, and anybody who tells you otherwise is selling something. What you can do, starting today, is make one more honest decision than you made yesterday. Say the true thing in one conversation where you would have stayed quiet. Turn down one request that you don't have the capacity for. Spend 30 minutes on something that's purely yours. Not for points, not for anyone's approval. Small, consistent, genuine. That's how a man builds a life he can be proud of. Not in grand gestures, in the daily practice of being a little more real, a little more grounded, a little more himself. The work is worth it, not because it impresses anyone, but because when you get to the end of your days and you look back, you want to see a man who lived by his own values, a man who was kind because he chose to be, a man who was present because he had something real to give. That man is in you. He's just been waiting on you to build the foundation. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What part of this hit home? Where are you in this work? Drop it in the comments. Let's have a real conversation. And if this kind of content is what you've been looking for, honest, practical, no nonsense, subscribe and come back. We've got more work to do.